Hey, what's up? Get Brocked here. Time for some more stories from Outlands. Today I want to talk about everyone's favorite, totally original, do not steal, we did not use any inspiration whatsoever, completely original battleship, the EFN Eternity's Advent. That was a joke. You've seen this ship in action several times, both in Outlands stories, the series itself, and more. Speaking of which, if you're new here, and you enjoyed this video and kind of want to see this thing in action, consider heading over and watching this series, if it interests you, right? Just go to the playlist, look for Outlands Season 1 or Season 2 or whatever, and go check it out. In this series, we create a watchable, fucking hope it's watchable, series by recording the Eternity's crew, their problem solving, we have story elements, and we just try to survive and interacting with the world in a unscripted, semi-scripted environment, with actors and players on the other side doing the same thing. To the dismay of people, I like to call it, Space Engineers D&D. Instead of rolling the dice, we actually do the thing, so our success is a result of our actions and not, a dice roll. For those waiting for the next season, at the point of filming this video, we're about 1 month out from release. You're probably going to be a little closer to that when you actually see this video. Who knows? Just know that we're filming it and it's going to come soon. Okay, let's talk about something that's often requested: the Eternity and her damage control systems and parties. The sexy thing when it comes to combat is the guns and the maneuvering and the armor and all the hard systems. But damage control is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, to her longevity and what makes the Eternity's Advent so powerful. She's a very large battleship, but practically speaking, this size doesn't actually help her in three-dimensional space combat. And her weapon loadout, while very impressive, is actually typically lower in firepower per surface area than most foes she faces in aggregate. In fact, in some cases, even in non-aggregate, in a one-to-one comparison, she has basically the same amount of effective firepower. Like, for example, the battleship Tiniest Snick. God, I fucking hate some of my factions and their ship names. But this battleship, or light battleship, actually had more barrels of heavy main weapon than the Eternity could bring to bear on a target, and was several times smaller and faster. So I've talked about the Eternity fighting in 1 versus 4 odds or worse several times now against formations that even double or triple her firepower. Go watch those videos, it's in the Outlands Stories playlist. But if you want to just continue here, take my word for it. In a shooting match, the Eternity loses in the firepower department, and she needs to rely on other aspects to pull out a win. Even though we don't have a firepower advantage in most fights we go into, the Eternity has won in statistically pretty bad odds. We've also lost some pretty good odds, but we don't need to talk about those. The point is, the Eternity is well known for continuing to deal damage and function well past the point that would have put most ships out of action. So how do we win or survive in these scenarios? Well, I've already spoiled it, but a lot of it is damage control, and the point of this video. The combination of a ship that was designed to be damage controlled or repaired, and a team that has done this many times, results in a vessel that would normally struggle to persist to a ship that is known to be borderline unkillable. In fact, the Eternity has never been outright killed in the series. There are situations where we do a rollback, for example, everyone DCs and we need to start over, but not once yet has the Eternity been straight up defeated. Now, we've retreated in pretty bad, scenarios with our tail between our legs, but we've never been outright destroyed. Damage control is far more complicated, though, than just take out your welder, weld things, win fight. The Eternity faces odds that are very much stacked against her, and we quickly figured out that just welding things wasn't going to get us a win. We needed something more sophisticated. And quite early on, all of our efforts on designing the ship were built around improving damage control, SOPs for damage control, and design of the Eternity subsystems. Let me bring you throughout the ship, at least the damage control section, so you have a better understanding what I talk about before I actually get into it. There's some important key things to watch for. The Eternity has several main systems related to combat. We have thrusters, we have main batteries, a subcomponent of that would be the lance batteries, and then conveyor systems. We consider non-vital systems the actual armor integrity, air tightness, oxygen, life support, and other things that don't directly contribute to the success of the imminent battle. Some of that actually includes our secondary weapon systems. We do not bother repairing these in battle. We don't even bother repiping them. When they go down, they're down for the fight. We're right now in the very spacious hangar, currently looking semi-sparse because the Fat Larry's not here. But as we head rearward, we can find one of the sections that will eventually bring us to the damage control portion of the ship. Right? Technically, we can do damage control in here, but we don't really have access to the important components of the ship. So, yeah, this isn't really where we do damage control. And from here, you can see these doors are color coordinated, so it's much easier to get to them in battle. Imagine you're in battle, and the ship's power is flickering and going out. Well, it's going to be hard to tell which door leads to where, and in the moment, this is very useful. Something important to address right out of the gate. While we do have this glorious rear thruster bank and some reverse thrust, a large component of the Eternity's thrusters are internal. Why? I'm generally against internal thrusters. In fact, I think they're kind of lazy design. But the Eternity has a very specific design aesthetic. Once again, original, do not steal. No, it's not original. And we want to stick to that design, and having thrusters on the outside really doesn't help to that. Functionally speaking, our damage control wouldn't change all that much different, but it's worth noting, yes, we do have internal thrusters, and the majority of our non-forward thrust, so everything except this thruster bank, is internal thrust. So, that does increase our survivability in that regard, but not as much as you might think. Okay, so we're in the damage control section of the ship. One thing you'll notice right out of the gate, we have color-coded systems. Blue represents direct connections to the thruster banks, so if you see a missing blue, you know what's up. This is important because sometimes lines get severed, like command or operations would be like, hey, we don't have reverse thrust, damage control, what's up? Damage control can follow the blue line and be like, oh, yes, there's a hole here, right? Cool. And then obviously, if thrusters take damage, you can go straight up to them over here, get out your welder, which I don't have because I am not a damage control rat. Here you go, and you can repair the thruster banks. Moving upwards throughout the ship, you can see we have a very tall thruster bank, and you do need to use jetpacks in here. Alongside the sides, you can get access to the secondary weapon systems. This is more important in post-repair, because like I said, we won't actually be really using our secondaries all that much, but you can see them. They lead out here, there's some more down there. We won't really be focusing on that, because that's not really part of damage control, right? There are systems that we sacrifice. Okay, so this is what I would consider the main ratway. As you can see, it's very dimly lit because you put lights in here, they're going to break off anyway in combat. So we start here, and we have a dedicated conveyor system for what the Eternity considers is her main battery. These are slaved super firing turrets in the top position, and this is our main armament. And a lot of damage control is keeping these things operational. So we'll move along here, and you can see there's conveyors throughout. And a very important thing to note, we've moved away from a centralized magazine to a dispersed magazine. This is just the nature of Warfare 2 and the tendencies for these things to blow the fuck up. So we have them along here. We're going to be taking a lot of damage to what is functionally our roof, right? So these things will blow up, but we've carefully designed it in such a way that they cannot chain detonate and take the entire roof off with it, or the dorsal side. And we only have a certain amount of ammo in it such that you can't really, it can't take out the ship. What will happen if one of these goes off is that the dorsal line will get severed here. But that is the beauty of this system that we've designed. It's a single conveyor line along here, no redundancies, and you just literally have one person running up and down the conveyor line, making sure this is connected at all times. And if it's not, you go get your welder out, or you build it and you place a new block in and get it back into the fight. So we can move along here. We can see we have a lower deck and an upper deck. So anyway, moving down here, we get to our dorsal 3 or C turret. This one is this guy right here. Right? This one's all the way at the end. And then we get to our main clustering of turrets. And this is how you check if the conveyor is still connected. Up here we have direct access to the turret should the turret need to be repaired in combat. From here we can move down, we get into another magazine. If this blows up, you just keep on rocking. Connect the conveyor line and keep going. We have our B turret over here. And you can see it's got its own cargo container that feeds up into it, right? And throughout. These turrets are very heavily armored. So if these turrets are gone, and we have rounds that are impacting the magazines directly below it, well, good chance that part of the ship is gone anyway, because the amount of damage taken to remove one of these turrets basically means that section of the ship is fucked, so it's okay to put a magazine directly below it. And then we have here, and we move forward into the ship. This is also where our jump drives are stored, and these are the ones that are focused on to be repaired, right? And then this leads us to the front of the ship, and out of damage control once again. I believe this is the, yeah. And this brings us to another important point. This is that other weapon system I talked about. These are our Lance batteries. There's 2 up here, 2 down there. And those are over here. As the fight generally progresses, we will attempt to keep our main battery up. But damage can get to a point where it's just impossible to get that operational again. The damage is too great, and at which point we will switch to a Lance-only kind of system, because these are much more heavily armored and easy to keep going throughout the fight. They don't require a complex conveyor network that leads throughout the ship to get to them, because they're just right here, and we can manually load them with the 1500mm shells. And that really is about it. It's worth noting, due to the design of the Eternity not initially being designed for damage control, our ventral battery is much harder to keep in the fight. And we'll make a token effort to keep it operational, but after a certain point we just give up, because this location was not nearly as optimized for damage control as the rest of the ship is. And as you can see, most of this is not accessible. So once we lose our ventral battery, it's gone. We're not going to do impart damage control to keep it operational. We're mainly just going to focus on the thrust, the main battery, and the forward firing batteries, the lances. And that gets us back to the meat. Jesus Christ. When you just have a slug down your throat? Welcome to the YouTuber life. Oh, God. I might need to replace this coffee with some fucking bourbon. Okay, so that's that. You saw the damage control system. It's not overly complex, and we could, and we're planning on, replacing some of these systems with automated welder systems, specifically for the dorsal battery turrets. But the rest of the system needs humans behind it, right? Because we can't just cover the whole ship in welders. I mean, we could, but then the Eternity's biggest weapon becomes lag and not, other things. Also, one thing that you may have noticed, the Eternity has very heavily spaced armor. We literally, the upper ratways, which is what we call them, where we were hanging out in that footage, that is actually in between two layers of spaced armor. Now, we could move the conveyor system below it, but A, there's no room, and B, it's a cool game mechanic, let's be real, so, yeah. Anyway, so afterwards, I talked to some of my main damage control boys, Pyro, Dolphin, and Warden. You see them in the series. Specifically, Pyro, as I would call him kind of the main damage control dude. They've acted as damage control through almost 10 plus battles, some of which were very close, where the Eternity looks like a potato chip afterwards, and some were easy wins where they only did a little bit. And they told me, what they learned, their techniques, so on and so forth. Control. And you can take this and apply it to your own ship, or if you're part of my new crew, you can listen to this video and get a leg up. So first off, the basic skills. Use Build Planner. Build Planner, you go up to a thing with a block selected, pretend it's like a conveyor tube or something, middle click, and it will pull the required materials to build one conveyor tube. You can spam click this and it'll fill up your inventory with conveyor tube things. This is really important because you will generally need to do a lot of repairing. So a turret goes down, you need turret components. You're repairing conveyors, it's probably not just one conveyor, right? And this lets you to have more efficient use of your time and not actually search or memorize what materials you actually need to repair something. Middle click, boom, it pulls everything out of the box and gives it to you immediately. Another super important system, as you would imagine, is to use Control-Z. This is the auto dampen, which, makes your relative velocity with the ship identical, and your jetpack will do its best to kind of keep you synced. This is super important because Eternity is going to be in battle when you're going to be doing damage control. You're going to be in hard banks, rolls, and on top of that, you're going to be rocked around by weapon fire constantly. Not being turned into a pinball is moderately useful to actually repair things, right? And then sometimes we even have a close call with an asteroid. There are other beneficial systems that you should use and prepare with when you want to do damage control. Power kits, bottles, and more. You don't want to overload on these. You need your inventory, and your inventory is precious to hold as much repair material as possible. But you're going to want some of this. The power kits, bottles, and whatever. You need your hydrogen tank, you need your oxygen tank, and you need power kits because welding is incredibly power inefficient. Yes, you can sit down on a seat, but that actually takes a lot of time. And then finally, something that Pyro stressed very importantly, is knowledge of the design of the ship. The Eternity's ratways are dark, and they get further darker when we take fire and we're in a red alert status. On top of that, we're going to be taking a lot of fires and shell impacts, and they're going to flash white lights, which can be very disorienting and rave-like if you've never really been through it. So you need to know the ratway like the back of your hand. We've made efforts to design it such that it's pretty hard to fuck up, but people have a tendency to get lost and end up somewhere else in the ship throughout the battle, and then they spend 10 minutes trying to get back home. This is what Pyro would call the basics. You need to get these down if you want to be useful and not kind of in the way. However, there are more advanced techniques that are, for the lack of a better term, useful if you want to excel at damage control. And the Eternity needs her excellent damage control parties, because I can tell the difference as the captain of the ship when I have excellent damage control and when damage control wants to go home early on a Friday night. Some battles we lose thrust, and I say, damage control, get us thrust, and they'll be like, working the problem, sir. And within 30 seconds, we have thrust operational again, and we continue the momentum of our fight. But some fights, we lose power or whatever, and maybe the problem is just too difficult to solve, and it takes us so long to get operational again that we've taken insurmountable damage from that system loss. It's not just thrusters, it could be guns or whatever. This is what we like to call the death spiral. When Eternity is above a certain damage threshold, or really any ship is above a certain damage threshold, it can operate at full effectiveness, with accurate continuous fire, able to maneuver, able to see what's going on, etc. However, once one of the systems or many of the systems go from a operational state to a semi-depleted or fully depleted state, you lose a lot of your momentum. And you go from something that can dish out offensive stuff to purely a defensive vessel. Maybe the weapon lines are down, maybe the weapons themselves are gone, maybe we have no thrust so we can't maneuver, or all of the above. But once we enter this death spiral, it becomes impossible to exit because we lose this offensive, capability. Thus, the enemy can push even harder, and we take even more damage. And it gets to a point where the damage control parties cannot repair the Eternity fast enough, or specifically her vital systems that we discussed earlier, such that we can never exit the damage state. We can never regain that offensive momentum, thus we take more damage, which requires the damage control to deal with that instead of getting back our offensive systems, and we eventually deplete to a, retreat state. And this difference between a position where the Eternity's combat posture is degrading versus her combat posture is kind of flatlined is something that's really on a razor's edge, and honestly is defined by both not only operations and their ability to fight the fight, but also damage control and how fast and how well they communicate. I can tell when I have damage control that wants to go home early, or I have damage control working on all cylinders and I have the A team. There's clear communication, problems that need to be solved get solved, and we keep tempo up. Pyro often noted that areas could take beyond repairable damage. So, for example, you're repairing the conveyor network, it's critical, right? It's what feeds ammo to the main weapon systems. However, we can take a round or multiple sets of round, right? We take a full salvo to a damaged section of the ship that the damage can become so extensive that it would take so long to repair that it just makes sense to abandon it and be like, sir, turret A and B are out of the fight, and you just give up on it. A term where this is also used is in the medical field, and it's called triage, and it applies here too. Sometimes, yes, you could potentially save, one section of the ship, but that section is so far gone that you could repair 3 other sections in that same amount of time. Sometimes as damage control, you need to understand that this is unrepairable or near unrepairable, and just move on. And you need to state that to command, sir, turret A and B are down hard, moving on to turret C. Command acknowledges, and then you move on to that area. Make sure everyone in damage controls knows that, hey, we're giving up on turret A and B. Focus elsewhere. This is an important lesson learned. Don't tunnel vision. Focus on where your efforts are worth the most. We're not looking to repair the ship and get back to 100% state. We're looking to just win the fight. Another important and overlooked aspect, combat jumps, jump drives, are a thing. And if you know space engineers at all, if you're not in a seat, you will get your ass left behind. And now, boom shakalaka, you're out in the middle of the void and you will slowly die. The Ratway has many seats that you can strap yourself into for a jump, but you need to be ready on a moment's notice for this to occur. And sometimes it just makes sense to build a seat right there on the spot. Because in combat, it's going to sound a lot like, you're repairing, this is the captain, we're jumping in 6 seconds, sit down. You don't have a lot of time to react, so having your toolballers ready and some of the materials to build a seat, once again, you don't need a lot, is kind of important if you don't want to be left behind. Another really important aspect of damage control and a limited crew is something Pyro likes to call picking a home. For example, in one of our final battles, Imperial Guard, a CDF personnel that was working on the Eternity that was trained by Pyro, decided at some point in the battle, hey, I'm going to just focus on our forward gun, the main lance battery, and then sometimes turret A if I have a little bit of time. Pick that and just stay there. The Eternity is huge, and moving around it takes a lot of time, even with jetpacks. So if you pick a spot, focus on it, and more importantly, communicate to others that that is now your spot, people can compartmentalize and focus on certain areas, and that speeds up time, right? You're pulling materials, and you know to pull the same materials every single time. You don't need to bounce around throughout the ship, and it just makes the usage of your time more effective. However, it's important to understand as damage control that sometimes a certain scenario requires all hands on deck. For example, there's been scenarios where our main hydrogen drive or tank explodes and takes out a huge section of the conveyor network. Unlike the turrets, when the turrets go down, we can just give up on the conveyor network and manually load. If a thruster bank goes down, those conveyors need to come back up. Thrust is life. If we don't have speed, we're dead. More importantly, we don't have maneuvering thrusters, we're dead. So if thrusters go down, there's going to be a call, all hands, move to the rear section of the ship and get this thruster bank back online. And that's going to require everyone to drop what they're doing and go over there right the fuck now. That feeds into another system, kind of like triage, but a little different, and it's the priority of the systems and the flow of the battle. As mentioned, guns or our main battery is our most important system. Having good uptime on our weapons allows us to provide pressure. Pressure prevents enemies from closing to, lethal distances, and it allows them to, it keeps them on the back foot. And if we apply enough pressure, we actually cripple and kill hostile vessels, which reduces incoming fire, which allows us to act more aggressively, and it creates a great feedback loop that will eventually win us the fight. And we want to enter and stay in that feedback loop. So at some points, or most points of the battle, our weapons are our number one priority. However, as damage control, you have to understand the flow of the fight. If we are losing and fighting a, fighting retreat, well, maybe thrusters are a little more important. For winning, well, maybe we can just give up on certain aspects, right, like secondary weapons or ventral batteries, and just focus on dorsal batteries to keep that pressure up. And in that case, focus on weapons. But sometimes we're losing really hard. And, maybe those guns can just go sit in the back corner and, sob because they're dead. And focus on jump drives, and thrusters become way more important because this has gone from an offensive fight to a fighting retreat, or just full-on retreat. Regardless, communication is key in this regard. The operations teams has a really good feel for the flow of the fight, but damage control has a very good feel of the damage state of the Eternity. It's very hard to tell from operations how the Eternity is doing. So, communicating back and forth between damage control and operations is critical. And one final tip, this one's a little weird, but find your mojo, find your feng shui, find your chill zone. Pyro was originally somewhat stressed about damage control, which makes sense because damage control is one of the most important aspects of the Eternity's ability to continue the fight. But when you think about it, damage control is almost an art form. It's the simple priority list, and you kind of have a lot of flexibility with how you do it. And more importantly, it's kind of a marathon and not a race. Battles take upwards of 30 minutes to an hour. You're going to be in a box with minimal lighting and tons of flashing lights because we're being impacted, and people are going to scream at you to get that fucking thruster bank up right now. Get in the rhythm, maybe even put some music on. Get out your welder and get to work. You don't need to worry about working as fast as humanly possible, just work efficiently. And that does more than you think, because you're going to get worn out by going ham the entire time. So being chill means you don't get burned out, and more importantly, you're not panicking or at a heightened state. And if you're not panicked and you talk clearly, you're calm. And being calm, like panicking, is infectious. And if I have a clear and communicating damage control party, it allows everyone to be on the same page and focusing on triaging, communicating, and more, which is incredibly effective. And that's about that. That is damage control in the Eternity. It's not this hyper-complex thing. We're not sealing bulkheads. None of that stuff. We have our own oxygen tanks. We don't need to deal with that. Breaching to the outer, space, not really a big deal, right? This isn't a naval vessel. But that's really about that. Once again, if you enjoy this thing, there is a series where we, the footage you see behind us, that details the Eternity stories and predicaments and how we evolved to eventually get to this state, right? We didn't start like this. So go ahead and check that out. And if you enjoy this series and you're already a part of it, consider supporting it. I'm trying to make this a full-time thing for me because, well, it is a full-time job already, and I'd like to continue that and give you this content because it's fun and it's entertaining to watch. So if you want to support me, consider maybe heading over to Patreon, dropping a couple doll hairs, being my sugar daddy, or just, doing the usual YouTube shit. You guys know how YouTube works. Like, comment, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.